This module will define cultural competence and how to apply cultural competence to smoking cessation and coaching interactions with your pivoters. So what's the technical definition of cultural competence? Well, it's a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together in a system, agency, or among professionals and enables them to work effectively in cross-cultural situations. Now, each year, the United States population is becoming more racially and ethnically diverse and creating many challenges for healthcare professionals. In an effort to reduce health disparities, one of the goals of Healthy People 2020 was to achieve health equity, eliminate disparities, and improve the health of all groups. Now, one hypothesized reason why health disparities exist in the first place is due to healthcare professionals' lack of cultural competence. So one way to eliminate health disparities is by providing educational opportunities and cultural competence to healthcare professionals like ourselves. So let's break this down a little bit. What are the basic bare bones of what cultural competence means? Well, there's three elements of cultural competence: awareness, knowledge, and skills. Cultural awareness is that cognitive process in which you as a coach are open to the values, beliefs, and practices of your pivoters. Cultural knowledge is the process of understanding different cultural worldviews other than your own. Lastly, cultural skills are the process of learning how to assess, communicate, and manage diverse pivoter populations. So why does culture matter? Well, culture can be compared to an iceberg, where part of the culture is above water and that it is visible and easy to identify to the naked eye, such as I might be wearing UNC gear. Well, you might surmise that I went to school there, it's my favorite team, something like that. But what you probably don't know is that 9/10 of my culture is below the water. So like an iceberg, 9/10 of it is usually below the water, as you can see in this picture here. So things that might go undetected are my values, the heritage, my experiences, my beliefs, and skills. All of this can have a huge impact on our day-to-day, especially how pivoters interact with our program and interact with you. So culture and language may influence health, healing, and wellness belief systems. It may also influence how illnesses, diseases, and their causes are perceived by me as a pivoter or by you as a coach. It also impacts our decision and processes and behaviors towards a program like Pivot. Now, as we discussed in previous modules, there are health disparities that exist among various groups using tobacco products. Differences that exist among population groups include smoking patterns, prevention and treatment of tobacco use, the risk, incident, morbidity, and mortality, and burden of tobacco-related illnesses, infrastructure and access to resources, as well as exposure to secondhand smoke. There's also unique barriers to quitting among multicultural groups as well, such as access to medical services, insurance, medications, having institutional racism, or even environmental exposure. So a few examples here. African Americans bear the greatest health burden from smoking. Particularly, they're targeted by by tobacco companies where they'll do price promotions that might include discounts or multi-packet combos. They also tend to have more tobacco retailers in their community too. And there's usually have a lower utilization of smoking cessation programs where there's access to counseling or medications. American Indians and Alaska Natives also have the highest prevalence of smoking, which also means they have the highest risk for smoking-related illnesses and diseases. Populations that live below the poverty line are less likely to successfully quit and more likely to not have access to affordable cessation programs. And of those with a disability, although they may have access and be told about programs, potentially if they go to their healthcare provider, they still lack information about options of cessation programs. And the LGBT community is 5 times less likely to quit and have access to insurance to even go to these types of programs. So by tailoring your coaching in a culturally systematic and consistent manner, you will more likely mitigate barriers to health and engage pivoters in their own cessation care program. So let's go back to the elements of cultural competence. So the first step in applying cultural competence is really building your awareness. So a really easy place to start is looking inward. Learn about yourself. Explore your historical roots, your beliefs, and your values. Then apply how these emotions or rationales impact your decision and health behaviors. Next, gather information. Well, I'd like to introduce this term called cultural humility. Cultural humility is meant to equip you as a coach with the right questions, meaning the pivoter is the expert in their own culture, which will help develop a mutually respectful and positive relationship between you and the pivoter. So not coming off as a know-it-all, but really respecting that they understand their body, understand their history, understand their culture, and why that's important to them, and how that applies to the pivot program and your interaction with them. Next is really applying the 5 R's, which we'll get into in the next slide here, that can assist you in learning and applying the proper motivational stimuli to mitigate the impact of smoking on the pivoter's health journey. So let's go through those here. So the 5 R's are relevance, risk, reward, roadblocks, and repetition. So relevance is really asking the question about their cultural norms and their beliefs related to smoking, quitting, or medications. Risk would be identifying like negative consequences of continuing to use it. So they might feel shameful, they don't want to smell like it, they might have a ding at work with their health insurance, they might want to do this for their children. Another thing we'd look at is a reward. So understanding what benefits them. So maybe it's their opportunity to get some me time, or to alleviate stress, or get away from stressful situations. It's their coping mechanism. Next thing you might want to do is look at roadblocks. So identifying significant barriers for them to successfully quit. So they might have a spouse that also smokes that does not want to quit. That might be a roadblock for them and make it very difficult. And lastly, you want to repeat this process. So revisiting the steps and affirming cultural needs and normalizing the difficulties for them. Normalization is key here. Overall, it's vital you continue to be open-minded as a coach, respectful and curious at all times about the impact culture plays on your relationship with your pivoters. Using the 5 R's to elicit culture-related health beliefs about smoking is a great option here, and working with the pivoters to negotiate these beliefs so that they can consider cessation options while honoring their cultural norms.